This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today. And welcome back. And here we are, and I am joined by Philip. Hello, Philip.
Aloha there.
How are you doing this week?
Oh, I'm doing, better than average.
Oh, good. Good, good. I know my week is going well because just before we got on here, I watched a quick video from Fail Army on different fails. Oh, you've never seen those?
No, I have not seen Fail Army and different fails.
Oh, yeah. If you look up Fail Army on YouTube,
Okay.
it's... Some people might think that they're violent, and yes, they are. But,
Okay.
but nobody gets really hurt, and so they say, and it just makes you realize that you've had a pretty good day. So,
I've been watching Salmonella Academy.
Salmonella.
Academy.
What is that?
He does odd little vignettes. He's a stick figure that has a head and hair. Anyway,
Is he on YouTube?
Yes, his language is a little crude, but he's rather amusing. Sam O'Nella.
I'll try it.
Oh, he's
Take
funny.
a look.
Yeah, crazy animal skeletons and things like that. Yeah, messed up history facts.
And then on Instagram, I am just taken by Juniper the Fox. I think it's Juniper the Fox.
I don't know. I don't go on anything.
Anyway, this woman has rescued foxes, and she had a mushroom, the possum, and there's a skunk, and there are raccoons, and just lovely. And then there's Flower the jumping spider.
Really?
Yeah, and this woman has all these spiders, and it's just,
That's his therapy for people that are afraid of spiders.
Well, it could be, yeah. It's really
if you
cool.
see these nice spiders that are named and are somewhat affectionate, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. But, you just kind of watch it, and they're good time wasters.
Yeah, it's good time wasting.
So anyway, this week we're going to continue with the series on building a great alternative education program or school. And we're going to look at, and we're looking for populations, the benchmarks, and the delivery. Delivery. So we'll get into that, and it's not necessarily in that order. So one of the things that you need to take into consideration when you're doing your mission statement and you're going with all your goals and pedagogies, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those as we go through. Next week, I am really hopped up on looking at curriculum. So we can start looking at some of that. But you need to hone in on what population that you're going to be serving. Because it would be great to have an alternative program, but who are the students? Are you going to do a K through 5? Are you going to, or something like a middle school? Are you going to do a high school? Are you, what are you going to do a K through 12 even?
Well, my experience lies in the grade 8 and above.
Right.
And that the grade 8 and the grade 8 kids that I'd worked with were included in a program that were sort of more geared toward high school anyway. So um,
Right.
I don't have a lot of experience in alternative
How,
elementary.
well, they do exist in
I know.
in Portland. You have the
Oh,
Multnomah Learning Center, which is down in
oh.
Northwest, and there are a number of them all around the state. So
Although one could say like Montessori is also
those are
somewhat
considered,
alternative.
yes, Montessori
Mm,
and schools of that ilk would
yeah.
be seen. And ilk here is not trying to be a slam. It's just means in that
Oh,
category.
was ilk derogatory? I didn't know.
I don't know, but I'm sure that somebody would
Oh, well,
possibly.
we didn't need to use
Um,
the word ilk in a derogatory fashion.
right. So yeah.
I didn't know.
So Montessori would be
Yeah.
alternative because it's not corporate mainstream.
Yeah, it definitely isn't like going to the elementary school per se as the rest of those did. Sort of. Yeah.
Right. Right.
There's also
And
like the French speaking immersion language schools
mhm,
or the German school. I know of those. And yeah.
right. Those could also be seen as that because they're not
Oh,
part of the corporate system.
yeah. Huh.
So, yeah. So, but what population are you going to serve? You need to be taking a look at the age
Yeah.
and what demographics are you going to be honing in on? Are you going to specialize on maybe it's re-engagement? Maybe you're trying to find students who just need a smaller space
Yeah.
and a smaller grouping in order to be able to do things. What's your region?
Hmm.
If are you who are you pulling from? What's the area that you're going to be pulling from? And what how many students are you looking to get?
What's the need? I guess would be the first question.
Well,
Yeah.
right. So what need are you there to serve? And
Yeah. I mean,
so
what do you have around you that needs to be served the most
right, and
first?
that's when you're going to be taking a look at all these other pieces.
Yeah, because I was you were
Um,
thinking about all those things, and I was saying, well, okay, let's. You can't be a Swiss Army knife, and certainly can't be funded to the greatest degree that we want to be. So, what's our greatest need?
right. And so maybe are you going to hone in on ELA for middle
Hmm.
school because that's when the reading scores seem to plummet more.
Hmm.
Are you going
Yeah.
to be working on the mathematics? Are you going to be working with students in order to shore up their skills that they maybe they didn't do so well in the elementary portion of their education and maybe they're just kind of gone? Are you going to be looking at trying to recapture students who are dropping out because statistics show that dropouts tend to be some of the most they don't do so well in life.
I
And
tend not to. Yeah, I mean, are you going to be? How supportive can you be too, as far as like medical, dental care? There was, can you reach the homeless kids? There are kids that are homeless.
there
They're doing the couch surfing thing, or
there are programs for homeless students.
yeah,
There are. And I don't know, I haven't been down in that loop. I know that there were one or two in the Portland area about
yeah,
20 years ago, 30 years ago, and they were doing very, very well. They were thriving. And they were taking really good care. And that actually came through one of the service programs in the Portland area that serves different kinds of youth. And that was, in fact, the program that I ran that you later ran
uh,
after I'd left. That was one of their the umbrella program that took care of all the residential needs for those students. They were the umbrella program for the homeless schools.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I also worked with one of the bigger shelters for homeless youth in Portland when I worked down in one of the central downtown Portland schools, my
Mm,
internship rather, and that was kind of fascinating. I didn't realize there's actually homeless students. What? That was my
yeah,
introduction as an intern. Like, oh, geez, I
there
guess
are a
so.
lot. There
There
are
are a
quite a
lot.
few.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
and a lot of them that cannot be picked up by the McKinney Vento.
Yeah,
So,
they do an incredible amount of innovative couch surfing,
mhm,
finding ways to stay a couple of weeks to a couple of months somewhere.
mhm.
It's fascinating how they get by.
Right. And those are the ones that just aren't connected with a school.
Yeah, they stay unconnected. That need. Wow,
Hmm.
that's hard to get. Or hard to give rather. Yeah,
Right.
hard to get them to anyway. You know what I'm talking about because they're really transient. You talk about switching schools maybe sometimes 3 times a year, and it's really
Oh,
hard to
yeah.
catch up to that. And I really
Hmm.
feel for those kids. We used to really go after them and try to
Hmm.
get their records, at least their records together at
Right.
one place. Yeah.
Right. And that can be quite a chore.
Yeah.
Oh, so, and then once you know who your population is that you're going to serve, how do you determine the appropriateness for them and whether or not your program is going to match their needs? So, are you going to, what kind of application process are you going to go through? And are you going to do an interview? And if you do the interview, are you going to have their parents or their guardians present? And how good are you at having the students speak for themselves and advocate and you working and not having the parents do all the talking? Because
Yeah. There's an
be,
art to that.
because once the parent takes over and starts doing the interview for the student, you're in a heap of trouble.
Oh, and the other way around. I was really hypersensitive to this, but never talk about the student as if they're not there.
Oh,
What about
exactly.
Bob or Jimmy or Jerry, or
Uh-huh.
Janine? And it's like they're not there. I'd always go, "Hey, wait a minute!" I'd always direct it back. We're talking about a person that's actually here, and I've
Right.
seen teachers do that too. And I'd take it back and go, "We're actually
Hmm.
talking about the student who's here." So yeah,
Right. There's a reason why they're there. No, I've had, I and other people I've worked with, we have had parents who took over the interview and
yeah,
refuse to even acknowledge that the student is there,
oh.
and they will try to take over.
Yeah, and tell
And
you how they're going to behave, how they're going to deal with it. Yes.
and one of my mentors one time during an interview finally looked at the parent and said, "If you don't shut up, I'm going to kick you out of the office until we're done."
Oh wow.
Because they had been so patiently trying to get this parent to
Oh yeah.
settle down because it wasn't their interview, it was the interview for the kid.
Which it is.
And the and the and the and the student was absolutely mortified. But
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
it's this is where we start dealing with parents and we start setting boundaries with them as well in order to make sure that the student is there for their learning, not for the parents. And
Absolutely.
so, and we want the students to shine.
There's some.
So,
Those are rare occasions that a parent will do that. It's sort of a thing that between them that they'll
mhm.
tell you a lot about that relationship, that dynamic that appears there. Most of the time, the parents sort of sit back, and you have to coax them a little bit, but they're really grateful to be a part of that conference and even that interview,
I'll
that
say it's
initial
about
interview. Yeah.
also it's about 50-50
50-50.
because
What do you mean?
more and more I saw more parents who had the need to be just talking about their kid
Oh,
and
yeah, that sort of thing.
and just being the main focus of it all,
Yeah.
and the kids being completely reticent. And
Oh, that sort of relationship was there. I'm talking about the more overbearing. I'll tell you how it's going to be, and with this and that. It was never too
oh,
much,
right.
but yeah, there was always the kind of the parent. You kind of steer them a couple of more times toward. Hey, let's talk about them. There were those,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But then when they left, there was a relationship you had maybe with the student to go. Okay, I know what's going to go on. I can help you a little bit more now, having met your parents.
Right, right, right. And then do you, like with your application process, do you also have some kind of essay that's in there where you can gauge their writing abilities
Yeah, I'd
and
often
some of their skills?
there was some debate about that one amongst staff, whether we should require that or not. And I always favored requiring that.
I always favor requiring it because it's a communication skill and it's something that
Yeah.
it tells you just how much you're going to have to do in order to work with that student, because writing is one of the standards that you're going to have to, whether you like the standards or not, it is a standard. And I believe it's a very important one. It has to do with communication skills.
And it also told me a lot about the kind of student they were.
Right.
Sometimes they wouldn't do it. So you're not going to go, well, you better do this or I'm not going to interview you. You couldn't do
Mm-hmm.
that. And sometimes they'd give you a very terrible essay. Sometimes they give you a really magnificent essay.
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
holy cow, this is going to be a gem to work with. It told you a lot about the student.
Right. And sometimes they give you a biographical dump.
That would happen too.
And
That's
and
true.
believe me, they're not always page turners.
No,
So so
no. Okay, and a couple times they were kind of like, oh dear. It wasn't. It was like, yeah, okay.
there's a little bit of oversharing.
It
And then
wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was like a little bit.
right, and then the last piece of this is who's going to manage the interviews, the application, the
Yeah,
entry process, and how does that happen? So
yeah.
that's a housekeeping kind of thing right there. Because the application, the interview,
Hmm.
everything, you want to make sure that the program is going to be there for the student. Do you also have, let's say, do you have like a 1 quarter for that student to prove themselves?
Oh, probation period
A
per
pro-
se.
right, a probation period, and it's not just the students proving themselves to you, but it's also you proving yourself to the student. So at
Well,
the
we set to see if it was a fit.
right. And
Yeah.
so at the end of that, towards the end of that time, you actually know. And so you can look at that student, you can say, you
Uh,
know what? Can't wait till next quarter. You're doing great. Or, um, you know what? Let's tidy these things up because things just are not working out here for you. And then you can do something where you can actually have a sit down with them and talk to them and figure out where the problems are and possibly rectify everything.
we're making
Because,
a big assumption though here, um, as far as our numbers go. We're assuming that we have a small enough number of students to deal with that we can actually interview them one at a time.
well, you should be able to, that you should be able to find time during the day that you're doing maybe 1 or 2 interviews a day.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you. I would agree with you. You should have enough time to do that. I'm just not sure if the audience that we're talking to kind of have that luxury of having small numbers and they can actually interview people and do their job and instruct and do all that with the
Well,
amount of
here's,
kids they're dealing with.
well, okay. So,
Yeah, I'm
quite,
just saying. I'd say
well,
my recommendation is interview your students for sure if you can. That's a really critical thing to do, of course. Yeah.
well, if you have, if you can come in before school starts and they can make it before school starts,
That's what we used to kind of do. Or we used
or
to, how
if
else
you
would
do it after school,
after school, but then
or
there were
during the
hours.
last part of school, depending on how you arrange your schedule.
Yeah.
So does your is your schedule, can you arrange your schedule to make it so that you can do that? If not, then how do you arrange for these things to happen?
I
It's not
took the place of a counselor, and she was also English teacher. And then I started teaching English, and it freed her up in the afternoon as a
mhm,
counselor. And she did interviews that way for a
right.
while, which was really really good. And I did her English duties. So
But if you don't do the interview with the student, you're doing yourself and them a disservice. And
yeah,
here's why. They need to interview you to make sure that you are the person or the program that they really want to be. It's got to be a two-way street. It's
yeah.
not you looking down on them. It has nothing to do with snobbery or elitism. It has to do with being there for the student. And
It's the establishment of the relationship right off the bat.
exactly.
Sort of a verbal, well, not a personal connection right away.
Mhm.
Sort of, I'll meet you, you meet me. If you don't like me, that's fine too. And we'll try to figure it
Yeah.
out. That kind of.
Hmm. Right. And
Yeah.
so you
I
need
just
to
said that because I noticed one of the programs I went into, it was really overwhelming for the counselor to interview all of the kids And I actually was doing a program by myself, and I interviewed 3 kids at one time, and therefore I could kind of get around them. I got around the interview process by doing 3 kids at one time, and
Hmm.
not one kid at a time. And then I could kind of connect with them that way. There's a way to do that, but it's not as personal because I did it for the longest period of time one on
And
one.
you really don't get a genuine hit on the
Yeah.
student because it's not a personal time.
And it was a high school completion sort of program. So what they
Hmm.
wanted to do is get out as quick as possible. So it was kind of like that fit that sort of venue. But if you're looking at like if you're looking at like a sophomore in an alternative program, you really want to make that personal connection. That would be a
Or
one-on-one
fresh or
for
anybody,
sure. Or
right?
freshman, yeah, someone lower or not lower but younger. You know, you really want to get that relationship established on a one-on-one. Yeah.
And if you have to do multiple students at once, you need to have tasks for the others to do while
Oh,
you have a 5 to 10 minutes with each one of them alone.
absolutely. If you have to do that, I only said that because my program was sort of they were older for sure. Most of them were 18,
Right.
and they had like 3 credits at the very most to go. So they were like,
Hmm.
"Hey, I just want to do the thing, get out." It's like, good, let's do that thing and get out. So
Hmm.
it's quick. Yeah.
So the next piece that I have down here is your program going to be in person? Is it going to be online, or is it going to be a hybrid? And that's something that you need to establish for yourself. And that way you can establish the next portion, because is everything already online for them to do? So, and that way, let's say that they're sick, let's say that they have to work late and they have to sleep in on a day or something happens that they're not able to be there. How are they going to access the information? So is some of that going to be online, so that if little Philip has to call in the morning and says, "Yo, I can't make it today. I had to work an extra shift last night. There's no way I'm going to be able to do something today. I will be in later on, but I can't miss X, Y, and Z this morning. So I will get online and I will take a look at it as soon as I'm able to wake up." Because maybe he called at 3:30 in the morning, and just let you know that. So you need to that kind of housekeeping is something that you need to set, but whatever works for them. We used to tell the kids, as soon as you know that you're not going to be in there, call, leave a message. We don't live here. We'll get the message in the morning and you'll be good as gold.
That's good. It's good culture.
So okay, so the next part is, what are your time elements? In other words, what times are you planning on having students attend? Do you have it in shifts? Do you have one group of students who come from 8 to 1? Do you have another group who might be there from, let's say, 2 to 6? Because some students do work late into the evening, even though the law says that they can't work past 10 o'clock, I think it is.
Hmm.
Um, and many of them have families, and they and the family dynamics determine the fact that they need to be up with the little ones until Lord knows how late, and who knows what else is going on. So 8 to 1, and then there's 2 to 6, and maybe do you have a night school possibility of 6:30 to 10? And maybe that's a Monday through Thursday, but it's a little bit more intensive. And this one would be where maybe they're only able to work during the days. So that would be considered a night school. So these are things that you probably really want to take into consideration. And then also, do you have a flex schedule? So let's say Philip can't make the 8 to 1 on one day. Can he do 8 to 1 on Monday and maybe come in from 6:30 to 10 on Tuesday and do his work, and that kind of stuff, so that he's still there, still has that, but it's prearranged. And so it's not like he just decides that he's just going to drop in.
You got my
Because
wheels spinning here. I was just individualizing little Philip, but I was individualizing that one and thinking, and then somebody else has got another thing, and I'm thinking, absolutely, why not be flexible, especially post pandemic. I
right.
mean, we learned how to be really flexible.
Hmm.
So all we need to know is is competency being met? Are they proficient? How are they showing it?
Right.
And
And are they
yeah,
there? Because we need to have, of
yes,
course, we have to have
yeah,
the attendance. You have to have the ADM in order for funding,
yep,
which is something that we will go into a little bit, possibly next week.
yeah.
And
That
then
administration stuff.
And then do you also have classes? Let's say that you're in the 8 to 1, the students are there for 4 classes. Maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the 8 to 1 schedule, you have a couple 2 or 3 classes that instead of going just 1 hour, maybe they go for 2 hours. And so maybe for whatever reason. Let's say that they're doing auto shop. Let's say they're doing woodworking,
Mm,
and the students would be served much better by being able to do something. Maybe, and we're going to get into some of this. Maybe it's a seminar class, and you barely get everything going, and all of a sudden you have to shut it down because the bell, and then they're off. So start thinking about that because how flexible can you be with your teachers on how long their class is going to be and what they're teaching?
yeah.
So because
The-
sometimes accessibility to materials is something that has to do with how much time you're getting in there and the feasibility of a student actually being able to clamp down and figure things out without losing it once they leave.
Yeah, one of the components of those longer classes is that many times those are rich environments. They're robotics,
Right.
yeah, PE, not P, maybe not, but there's a climbing wall
Hmm.
involved. Yeah, it's a very cool class,
Hmm.
and so those classes that have rich environments maybe go a little longer than the other ones. Yeah,
Right. So you might even look at, are you going to be teaching seminars? And how do you do those seminars with those students? And you really want to be in there because a seminar is so fantastic because not only are you setting that up and you're just a facilitator, but it's also where you set the standard that you're all contributing and that you're all learning and you're all there to listen, to learn, and to move forward. Because
model.
I have
Yeah,
learned so much from doing a seminar type thing.
yeah, I
Um,
really enjoy those.
and
Kids
what
do
I,
too.
right. And what we used to do is we used to have writing groups and we used to have book groups, and those would be much longer than everything else. And the students would sit down and we would invite people and then we would talk about books. And so if you do something like that, if you're talking about a particular book for English language arts, or let's say you're writing, maybe you're doing it with science and you're trying to solve a problem. And so you start off possibly with a seminar on what can we do, and then the students have to problem solve, and so they start working with each other in trying to figure something out that has to do with the materials that you used. And we'll bring that up in a little bit with assessment.
Mhm. Yeah,
So you might also look at workshops, and that would be like well, basically like the auto, the wood, robotics, welding, a lot of the trade classes. You might do that if you can get something like that. And with some of the trade classes, because I know that a lot of programs have, I know a lot of schools have gotten rid of those. One thing that you might take a look at is working with local businesses and also the local community colleges because they have trade programs and they are jonesing for people. And so you may be able to do something with them on that.
that's
So
true.
take a look at that. Um, are you going to be having a lecture? There's nothing wrong with lecture as long as lecture is not the only format.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Um, you could also
Uh,
do exploratory and look at Peter Green and Peter Gray and from Boston College and take a look because we talked about him where the students determine what it is that they're going to learn and then they set off to do that. But that also has to be structured in a way so that little Philip doesn't say, yeah, I think today I'm going to learn about this, and then he just kind of zones out
Yeah,
and goes off on his own.
yeah.
And
That's the
and
thing they like to do. Yeah, I'm going to do this. That has nothing to do with what you were doing yesterday, dude.
right, right. So
Absolutely nothing. Yeah,
so it has to be, so you can't,
structured. Yeah.
yeah, structured, and you can't let them pull a con.
And I would
Uh,
also say that in this day and age, you're saying it can't be lecture only. And it can't be lecture only because we have, at least we have visual aids. I mean, there's more to the world now than the chalkboard and the voice.
mhm,
We have technology, and it's a crime not to use it. I mean,
right,
it's just so, it's on your phone, for goodness sake. It's so easy to use. Use technology. Do
right.
not use just chalk or a whiteboard. It's just readily available.
And when
It's
we
everywhere.
right, and when we talk about curriculum next week, we're going to be talking about what sources you use.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, that's true too. There's
we
some
will look at that.
yeah,
And
there's some really bad things that are being used. Yeah.
so, okay. And then you might come up with some of your own methods of delivering the curriculum.
Yeah.
But your environment should actually have more than one, and everybody knows this, to differentiate the curriculum, to use universal designs for learning, to come up with
Mhm.
things and make it into a really positive, nurturing environment for the students. That doesn't mean trophies for everybody. It means a lot of input, a lot of detail, a lot of cohesive collaboration. And then we come to the fun part that everybody wants to talk about, and that is your benchmarks, and how are you going to, what you need to figure out. And this can be on the teachers. We will talk about program assessment later, um, either next week or the week after. And with benchmarks, I'm going to say that if you're looking for your students to hit certain benchmarks, they need to be done in person and not taken home, not leave your site, that they need to be done right there. And here's why. There are a number of parents who like to get involved, and I believe it happened a little bit when I was in school, but the number of parents who do the work for the students has grown. Where if Billy comes home with his stuff and he says, I don't know how to do this, I've seen it happen. It happened under my nose. I'll do a really quick anecdote. I had a student, every year my students did science fair, and they had to pick a science fair project. And this one student decided that he was going to make his own camera, and he didn't know where to get the materials. So all of his buddies got the materials for him. They said, here, 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 and they got them for him. And he's like, but I don't know what to do. Well, they started putting it together for him. There were adults who put stuff together for him. And finally, when his project was done, he'd hardly lifted a finger on it. And I had 3 or 4 people come in from outside to do the judging. And there were several categories, and there were rubrics for each part of the scoring, and on a scale of 1 to 6. And then I would total up for each element, for each, what do you call it, for each trait. I would tally up how many points they got, and then I would divide it by the number of judges. Well, he ended up winning, which blew my mind, and people were furious, and they said, you can't let him win. And I told them, I told you not to do his work for him, but you should hold in your heart that you did some very good work.
Wow.
But yeah, and they were outside sources who had no idea about any of it. So if we want people to do their own work, And if they leave the room, how can you be sure? Can you give me that an ironclad agreement that they did all their own work? It's better that they do their assessment because that way you can determine what it is that they need to continue to work on. And I have a little slider that's going to come up in here. So,
I never. The thing about assessments and all
mhm,
was that I never let them know it was an assessment. I mean, until I needed an assessment, but I kind of didn't. I downplayed that. Um, I always drove for what the assessment wanted from them. It wanted like a five paragraph essay, expository and
mhm,
or persuasive, right? I asked for persuasive, and I showed him how to write a persuasive. We worked on persuasive. I taught him how to write persuasive essays, and we
mhm,
talked about it conceptually and constructively and how to do it.
mhm,
And they wrote some pretty darn good essays, and
mhm.
I collected them. And then I said, "Hey, want to write a sample?" And by that time, it was pretty much, "Yeah, Summers, I can do that."
See, you
But I
can do it
had samples anyway.
right.
It was like,
You could,
"Hey,
well, you
there you
could do
go."
that.
Yeah.
You could do it that way, but what happens if somebody doesn't quite meet the mark? What do you do with that student then? And how do you
No,
let everybody else move on?
I never had
So,
anybody not meet the mark. I mean, eventually they made the mark.
well,
It was sort of an
eventually,
individual. It was an
eventually,
individual thing. As far as
right,
assessment went, yeah, it was never. But then again, I was in a kind of the alternative setting where it was everyone was an
right.
individual sort of thing.
Because not everybody's going to be in the same place, and you don't want to
Yeah.
have somebody lagging behind, because what do you do if somebody already knows how to write a persuasive essay and they can meet that standard? Are you going to leave them there, or are you going to give them something else to work on?
Oh, I give them more. I mean, it gets to be a better persuasive essay per se, but yeah, they usually have something else to work on. Yeah,
Right,
and then
right.
move on
You've
to something
got
else.
to. So the question is, as each student is working on a standard, where do they go if they're still in process while other students are able to move forward and move
Oh,
on to the next step?
well, the
So
yeah, yeah.
So the question is too that by the end of the year, let's say by the end of the term, by the end of the quarter, however long this is going to go, can students, can we take away freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grades? And so if a student is not readily able to meet a certain benchmark because they may not be at that point yet
Oh, right.
emotionally, can we, when they come back, let's say that in June they haven't met two or three standards that they needed to meet. When they come back the next year, how do you get them so that they work on those standards, because they're going to be want to be with all of their friends? So how do you bring them up so that they can start catching up with everybody else? So, can we do that? Can you set up a system where
Yeah.
instead of being put into a certain grade level, you're put in and you are able to work your way through certain dimensions, let's say,
And that's
or
what
certain
alternative ed
stations,
is.
or put them in certain stations. Well,
Yeah.
the problem is that the way that you described doing the essay for the standards, it's a mainstream. It's almost
Well, then
the
you misunderstood me. If
because
that's
you
what
have
you heard,
every
then I didn't do it correctly because it's exactly what I would not do in a mainstream. I'm saying that you're working process with a student, and you're
right.
just the process is to get them a competent, proficient essay, and when they get it, that's it. They've made it. That's the standard, and I can I can staple that to the standard sheet and give that passing grades. It's
Okay.
not a test per se, and the competencies never were.
Right.
They may have to pass the test, but if they have all of the samples, it's at least in that state of Oregon, they
Right. The
don't need to
stand
take the test.
Right. And as
They
they
make
meet
them,
those,
but
then
they
they can
don't.
move on to the next piece.
Well,
But,
it's not a matter of moving on. It's just a matter of getting them done and going, okay, you've got
well,
them.
no,
Let's
they've
get your
got to move on
credits.
to something else. You can't just have them lagging around not doing anything.
Oh, no. I mean,
They want to
it's
go to
just
the
an
next step.
aside as far as the samples go. We were always just writing. And I know this is good enough to give you a sample in persuasive writing, so I'll use this.
Right.
Yeah, and that's all. We're always just writing to write, so we're not moving on per se. Writing, you're never done writing, so we're always doing the writing thing. And I've got kids that if they meet the standard. That's great, but let's get better than the standard
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then, so working with those elements, because that's pretty much everything that I had written down for us
Oh
to
yeah,
cover tonight. So, I mean, that's a lot to actually think about. What's your
it's a ton. Yeah,
what's your scheduling look like? Are you going to get rid of the labels that students have to work under until they have met all the competencies, everything, and they're able to, let's say that they are able to be proficient in getting a job and moving out and going forward in life? And when they are, um, is that when they graduate? Is that when
yeah.
you allow them to go?
That's when they
Or,
said that in the district. They get their credits and they get their competence. The state said their competencies, and I always had that third thing: do I feel good enough to say they can graduate? Not that I could hold them back, but yeah, and, do I feel like I can send them out in the world?
mhm.
Yeah,
And are you also giving them credit for their work? I mean, for
always.
their job, for their work experience.
We always did, yeah. Of course, you worked in a program that you had a
Mhm.
direct relationship with that, but
Well, yeah,
we always give
but
them
we
credit for
had,
that.
well, our students went out on internships, and
Yeah,
so
so they
and
had
and
assignments and everything, didn't they?
right, and they
Yeah,
had things that they had to do. They didn't, if they didn't fulfill the terms of their internship, and that
yeah.
was career exploration. It had a lot to do with whether or not they were looking at that job seriously and
Hmm.
finding more out about it, and then doing some writing and looking some things up, but also doing their volunteer hours.
When
And that's
our program, we only give a year for work experience, for
mm-hmm,
just flat work experience. And when it came to PE, if you were involved, if you're a dancer or you played a sport, we gave that.
right.
When it came to, credits, though, that, fine arts, maybe we're a little flexible, but there wasn't any leniency per se in any of the core credits. Of course, those were classes, and I didn't give, as far as English credits, those were classes too, not outside. Unless you took a college credit, some kids took like writing 121,
Yeah.
and I would certainly give a half a credit for writing 121 at the high school level. That's a heck of a class.
Well,
That's a
it's a
credit.
dual. That's a dual credit class.
Yeah, I mean that obviously. So,
So
but
whoever's
yeah,
teaching it is the one that's going to give them the credit
so
for
core
hopefully
credit
for the.
was always standard. The curriculum, but yeah. It's always nice about alternative ed is you could always kind of cut corners by giving, if they played a sport, that was like PE times 10 when you talked about practices and things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And so, yeah, because I always told the kids, keep a journal.
yeah.
Anything that makes you sweat.
There was always that too. Some kids
And
would be really like heavy duty in the dance or sports, and some kids would just walking the dog was enough, but that was still PE too.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So, and then some of them went and because Crunch was pretty cheap back then. I don't know what it costs now, but
it still is.
like $10 a month.
It still is, I guess. Yeah,
So they did that.
yeah.
And one of my kids said, yeah, it's like a half a mile from my house, but I don't have any way to get there. And I said, can you walk?
It's like the person who searches for the closest parking spot in the gym. It's like, come on, dude. You're at the gym. You can walk it.
And people, oh, there used to be fist fights at the gym over the parking places that were closest to the door.
Oh, no. Oh, the
Yeah,
irony. The irony.
yeah. It was it completely.
Boxing for close parking spots before you get in the gym. Oh,
I,
oh.
something else you might want to look at too is, do you have in your program, is there a place for mentorship for the older students to the younger students, for the for the sage students versus the newbies?
I would love a program where you could do that. That,
You know,
yeah. You teach
there.
best what you also need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's all about keeping the students in mind, because once you ask a student to mentor another student, you need to have real strict boundaries around what that means, and there has to be some kind of training that goes with it.
Oh, yeah.
Because what you don't want is, I don't want Philip to be mentoring little Jose over here and him getting Jose to do a lot of different things for him because he'll beat him up. and that kind of a
That would be
mentorship.
extreme. Yeah.
Yeah,
You just don't want to have coercive behavior in any way either.
right.
Although there's some of those kids, they take this overwhelming sense of responsibility. I love to see. It's like, oh, really? You want me to do that? And they sort of like mother hen the person a little bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun. It's like, oh, you're taking this very seriously.
And you look at the kid, and the little kid or the one that they're mentoring usually has the face of a squished cat or puppy.
They're kind of like, oh, yeah, I will love him and pet him and call him George, like a little cartoon.
What are you doing to me? Help!
Considering that they think anybody over the age of 15 is an adult, It's like, I remember when you were that age. Oh, you're an adult. No, they're only like 18. They're actually a snotty little kid. But yeah. I didn't say that 18-year-olds who are not snotty kids who are actually 18. Welcome to adulthood. It sucks.
So, it seems that we are done for today, and next week we will be looking at curriculum. We're going to take a dive into funding, and we may actually get into evaluation and assessment of your program or school. So if we don't make it there next week, it will be the week after. There are some things that we are going to talk about, and we didn't hit on it yet today, and we're not going to today because we're out of time. But that would be the term of redshirting, which is, do you want, and I think we discussed this last week or the week before, where boys started a year later than girls. And I think that's an episode unto itself. So we will be taking a look at that. And if anybody's interested, there's an article from The Atlantic by Richard Reeves. And that gives you a good idea of what we'll be discussing. And that will be upcoming in the near future. So, Philip, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
And to all of you, have a fantastic week, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Good times.